let me take you through this and show you how the mind map works. Always start at the bottom left and then work round clockwise. So Mr. D cat shirts, start with Mr. Click on there. M for melody and R for rhythm and meter. So let's look at melody. So the kind of things you could talk about with melody are the range of the melody from the top note to the bottom, the contour of the melody, so that means the overall shape, and perhaps whether there's conjunct or disjunct movement, that's moving by step or by leap. And then perhaps the structure of the melody, how many bars there are, whether there are any sequences, and then the motifs, whether there are any rhythmic patterns, whether there are any pitch shapes, and whether any of the notes are ornamented, trills or mordants, turns, appoggiaturas, acciaccaturas, and so on. So that's all to do with melody. Rhythm and meter. Well, if we talk about rhythm, one could talk about note lengths, duration. So what have we got here? Crotchets, quavers, etc. All that kind of thing. There might be dotted rhythms, dun, da-dun, 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 da-da, or triplets, triola, 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 triola. Straight quavers, di-di-di-di, or swung, dun, da-dun, da-dun. You get that in jazz. And if there's a repeated rhythm, then that's called an ostinato. It might be called a riff in pop music. As well as rhythm, we have the idea of beat. And of course, that can divide into meter and tempo. Meter, of course, is whether it's in 2-time, 3-time, 4-time, or something else perhaps. And of course, whether it's in simple or compound time as well, whether the beat divides into 2 or 3. Regarding tempo, that of course means fast or slow, and you might have changes in tempo. Of course, there are large numbers of Italian words that fit with those points. So, rhythm and meter. Now we go back to the original and then go to D. D is for dynamics. What have we got for dynamics? Loud and quiet, of course, and then there are changes in dynamics, and of course all the Italian words that go with those. Let's now move round to cat. Those 3 words are context, articulation, and texture. With context, we might have something about the composer, and then whether the piece was written for church, or for a concert, or for a film. That's all to do with the context. A is for articulation. Might be played smoothly, legato, or detached, that's staccato, with slurs, and a whole host of other similar things. Texture is thick or thin, how many instruments are playing or how many parts are singing. And that might be melody and accompaniment, just the tune with backing underneath. There might be a drone or a pedal note. And then there are these 4 words which I'm calling the phonies. If we look here, we've got monophony or monophony. If something has only one line, one person singing, for example, it's called monophonic. If there's several parts playing all at the same time, in other words, playing chords, that might be homophony, and you'd say that texture was homophonic. If there are many different parts at the same time, it's polyphonic, polyphony. And if you've got, in certain kinds of folk music, 2 instruments playing a similar melody but slightly differently, that's called heterophony, or it's a heterophonic texture. So, texture. Context, articulation, texture, cat. Shirts. We have structure. Structure, well, we've already talked about structure with melody, but structure is basically about having the music in different sections. It might also include thoughts like where the sense of climax is. Harmony, well, we're talking about chords, of course. Chords might be major, minor, diminished, etc., etc., a whole host of different kinds of chords. And also well, we're going to look at tonality later. It's down here. Let's leave that for now and look at instrumentation. So, instrumentation, well, what instruments are playing? And you might also want to mention playing techniques. So, for example, whether with a violin you're playing pizzicato, plucking, or arco with the bow. You might have a trumpet playing with a mute. As well as real instruments, you might have electronic sounds and effects. I've just put a couple of things here. Attack and decay, how quickly the note begins, how quickly it fades away. So like a cymbal, for example, will have a long decay, even if it has a quick attack, and lots of other things which need to be considered another time. The general word for the sound quality is timbre, although the Edexcel, the word used by Edexcel nowadays seems to be sonority. That's the kind of sound, and all that is linked with instrumentation. Range, we've talked about already under melody, and of course that's all linked to pitch. And with regard to pitch, you might think about note names, scales, and different patterns of notes in the way that scales are built up. Intervals, there to there is a third, there to there is a fifth, etc. And of course the way you write pitch is all linked to the idea of clefs. All that's loosely linked with the idea of range, but it's a little bit broader than that, of course. Let's have a quick look at tonality. That's all about major and minor, not merely individual chords, but whether a whole section uses one particular scale and the associated harmonies. So you might be in C major, in which case you won't have any sharps or flats. There are other modes than major and minor. We won't go into that now. Cadences, that is how the a phrase will end. For example, chords 5 and 1, the chords on top of those two notes, or 4 and 1 to end the phrase. Modulation is when you change from one key to another. Atonal is when there's no sense of key at all. Such thoughts spring to mind in relation to tonality. And then the last one, S for setting. Well, talking about words, word setting, word painting. There we are. Those are subjects for further exploration. So, structure, harmony, instrumentation, range, tonality, and word setting. That comes under shirts. Let's look at this again. Oh, I didn't get rid of that before. Always collapse the mind map so that you don't get bogged down with too many thoughts. So here we go. Mr. D. Cat shirts. You may have noticed, of course, that I've put a red circle around there. I've got a blue circle around there with red letters. Here I've got a black background, white letters, and a blue well, it's a rectangle but with round edges, and this is just an ordinary rectangle. Blue again, just helping you to group these things in your mind, but of course there are different colours for the different elements as you remember from before. And that's that for now.